Tonight on PM Express, we're continuing with our countdown to the 2019 budget and also probing how far government has come with its 2018 targets. Let's take a quick trip down memory lane. And the question we're asking tonight, 2019 budget, better times ahead. And we know that in 2018, a number of promises were made. And if you look at the targets that were set, we set GDP growth rate target of 6.8 with non-oil GDP growth rate of 5.4%. That was the target we set for our GDP. Now, let's get down to other targets that we set for ourselves. And you will see that whether we've made progress or not, we set inflation target at 8.9% and revenue target of 39.8 billion. That was the target we set. Now let's look at our total debt stock, which was at 139 billion cedis, and that represents 68.1%. And the promise was to reduce expenditure. That was actually the promise by the Finance Minister, Ken Ofori-Atta. Let's look at other targets. Government promised to address unemployment and champion economic growth. You remember that? Government said it was going to reduce expenditure, cut down costs to be able to save the public purse. Have we seen that? And the question is, did we achieve these targets? Let's get down onto the 2019 budget. What should we expect with the 2019 budget? And well, before we even get to the 2019 budget, let's look at whether we achieved some of the targets. GDP growth rate is currently 6.66% as at now. So you'll be asking yourself the question whether we've actually achieved that target. And annual inflation rate, currently it fell to 9.5% in October, year on year 2018 from 9.8% in from the previous month, and that's according to the figures coming from the Bank of Ghana. Let's look at the total debt stock that hit 158.4 billion according to the Bank of Ghana once again. So you know where we are coming from, about 139 billion, and we're hitting 159.4 billion. That's huge and is very significant in the upcoming budget. Let's look at the what government wanted to do. Government says it will create over 1,000 jobs. And of course, as at October now, government is claiming that it has done that. Well, we'll be probing that also because we have people who have answers to those questions. As of July this year, government failed to meet revenue target. And of course, if we fail to meet the half-year target, it means that we definitely can't meet the year on target. And let's look at government, what government is saying. It says, on the 2019 budget, and the question has been, what should we expect? Did we perform well in the 2018 budget? What should we expect in the 2019 budget? And government says the budget will be heavy on infrastructure and focus on delivering on the flagship programs. What are some of the flagship programs? By now, you should know that 1.7 billion is going into free SHS, one constituency, 1 million, 1 million and one district, one dam. These are some of the flagship programs that the MPP government wants to champion going into 2019. We also know about one dam, one district, one dam. All of that will be having a toll on the 2019 budget. Don't forget, with the 1.7 billion going to the free SHS, it's only this year that government is going to finance all three streams of the free SHS. And you know what that means to the public purse. So we're saying that what does this budget bring? And if it's talking about infrastructure, let's look at what people are also expecting of this budget. 2019 budget, higher expectations. And there's been public outcry of hard economic times. And the question is it really hard economic times? We're told that some figures are tallying very well on the economic grounds, but are people feeling that in their pockets? So the ordinary Ghanaian wants to feel it in his pocket. Would we see that tomorrow when Ken Ofori-Atta presents that budget? The Trade Union Congress has written to government, asking government not to introduce new taxes. Don't forget that the Chamber of Commerce is also asking government not to introduce new taxes. The explanation is that it's having a heavy toll on businesses. Will this happen tomorrow? We'll be looking forward, and we'll also get to speak with someone who can provide us with some answers. And what is the manufacturing industry looking out from government? It says production costs must reduce, import duties must reduce, electricity tariffs must reduce, and artisans today, I heard them speak, and they're asking government to allocate a percentage of the budget to them. That's very interesting. And whether government will listen to this, we'll be looking forward to that. Now, yesterday, the minority in parliament made some projections into the 2019 budget. Listen to it, very interesting. And the minority says it's a hopeless budget. That's what the minority says. It says the 2019 budget will bring nothing positive to Ghanaians. And it says that there will be more public debts, there will be more unemployment, and the list goes on. We'll be interrogating that shortly, whether that really is the case. And the question is, better times ahead? Well, we'll be probing that on PM Express. I'll introduce to you my guests who are already seated after this break. Welcome back to PM Express. My guest tonight, Solomon Kote, is General Secretary of the Industrial and Commercial Workers Union. Good evening to you, sir. Thanks for joining us. And Dr. Lord Mensah, a Senior Lecturer at the University of Ghana Business School. Good evening to you. Refreshing to have you.
Good evening.
And also on Skype is Information Minister Kojo Ponkroma, who has some insights into what's going to happen in the 2019 budget tomorrow when the minister takes his turn in Parliament to deliver that to parliamentarians. Let me start with you, Dr. Lord Mensah. We've seen 6.8 GDP target, 39.8 billion revenue target, 6.8 GDP. Whether we've achieved that or not, how would you describe the 2018 budget with regards to targets and achievements?
Well, if you look at the numbers that were turned out as target from 2018 budget that was read in 2017 November, but then we had a review at the middle of the year somewhere in June. I mean, clearly tells you that fine, we're almost on target. But you're looking at GDP growth rate overall of about 5.4 as a target, but then we achieve, as we speak now, is about 6.6, which is, I mean,
6.66.
6.6, fine. I mean, let's say 6.7. I mean, if you relate that to the 5.4, we are almost close. I mean, the percentage difference is not that much in terms of targets that we set for ourselves. You know, setting a target is quite difficult. I mean, if you look at the projections you have to do and the circumstances, whether you fall through the target, I mean, so many things can change. So I think on that side, we're a bit closer, and it is a plus. It's one of the macro achievements. I would say, fine, the economy has on its front, if you look at it with macro lenses, I mean, it's good for us. You can also see clearly the inflation rate. I mean, the target was 8.6, and as we speak now, as of October 2018, as of last month, it was around 9.6, which is also quite close. I mean, almost about 1 point something difference. For me, it's an achievement. We've gone close to the target, but then the question is, how does all these macro successes? We've seen inflation, we've seen interest rate coming down. Of course, inflation comes down with interest rate, because once you are doing the monetary policy targeting inflation, trying to bring inflation down, interest rate goes down as well. So they move hand in hand. And these are things that we'll be happy to see as Ghanaians if it only reflects in our lives, you know. I always say that there is a time lag between when we see macro successes reflecting in the micro that is in our households, in our homes and all those. But it looks as if Ghanaians, our macro achievement is taking too long, to reflect in our lives. And so that brings into question whether those numbers that we see from our state institutions and then from our economic management unit, whether they are real or not, it brings into question. And so for me, if you ask me whether we're close to target or not, I would say yes, we were. But then we need a transformation of that in our lives.
But somewhere along the line, I mean, I think in July or recently, you made the point that the government may not meet its inflation target. What were the signs for you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if you talk about inflation, you're looking at the possibility of more money in the system, chasing fewer goods. But then I realized that controlling inflation in Ghana is not mainly in-house, because Ghanaian economy is more or less an import-driven economy, for which you try to control inflation in-house. But then remember, when you bring the goods from outside, there are some things you don't have control over, especially the exchange rate and all those. But I think for looking at the shocks and my expectations and all those, the government has been able to do well in terms of trying to manage the exchange rate on the market, which for me, it normally fits into most of the goods. Because in Ghana, if you enter a typical shop, you realize that most of the goods there are foreign goods. And looking at all these goods, definitely you need dollars to import them. So if you're able to control the dollar, then obviously you should have control over inflation. But I thought maybe the dollar will have its way. I mean, like recently it shakes itself, and then the whole system was more chaos and all those. So that was why my projection thinking. But then the target was close. It wasn't met, but it's close.
It's
so,
close.
Yeah.
Well, the dollar is not doing very well, but at least it's come down from the initial. It's now 4.8 something.
Yeah.
So yeah, some good news there. Information Minister Kojo Nkrumah has joined us on the phone. But before I get to you, just a quick one. Let me get to your thoughts, Mr. Kote. You have written to government. You don't want to see new taxes introduced. And in fact, you're not the only people in this. We've had Chamber of Commerce also speak for their people. One reason they give is that it is hurting businesses bad. And so they don't want to see new taxes. But for you, you want to see the existing tax exemption regime, you want an overhaul of it, and you also want government to find ways of, bridging the gaps. What are your reasons?
In fact, thank you, and my dear regards to your viewers. This particular government made it known to Ghanaians that they don't believe in taxing the citizenry to actually develop the country. So from day one, the first budget presentation, they were able to christen 17 separate taxes and call them nuisance taxes, scrap them off to give leverage and opportunities for people to grow. So if this is their philosophies and their focus, this time round, having another opportunity to come with a budget, we are hoping that they will leave to that, view that they have, so that we will not be overburdened. If we look at ourselves as labor, you'll notice that the wages itself that we earned are not that competitive if you take the West Coast and look at what Ghanaians earn. And then when you look at the various indirect taxes that we suffer after taking your salary, okay, over 2/3 of your money goes back into servicing government taxes. So it's just a good clarion call to government that, hey, we know you need money, even though you've gotten a lot of your projects that you have signaled to do in this country, you need more money. And then you've also told Ghanaians you are not interested to go for aid, you are not interested to go for grants. So how are you going to get it done? Are you going to get to the average man on the street and hold us by the neck to get it? So we are saying, please take note, don't get it that way. If you do, we may have to react.
Well, let me get the Information Minister quickly on this one. Good evening to you, Mr. Kojo Nkrumah. Many thanks for your time on PM Express.
Good evening. Good evening to your guests in the studio and to your viewers as well.
All right, so there are high expectations, Mr. Kojo-Nkrumah, for tomorrow's budget, and the ordinary Ghanaian is looking at how this will reflect in his or her pocket. Now, industries, the labor front, all of them, businesses have their own expectations, but already the minority says there is nothing positive in tomorrow's budget. In fact, they say it is a hopeless budget.
Well, thanks, and I think people are right in having high expectations of the upcoming budget. This is the third budget of the Akufo-Addo administration, and it will be our first budget under which we will not, necessarily be holding on to the whims and caprices of the IMF. Remember, we've been under an IMF program for the last 3 years, 2 of which have been in our tenure. And as we get into our third budget, we have a conviction that we have successfully scaled the benchmarks of the IMF program, giving us more discretion in putting our money in areas that we consider as priorities. We've spent the first 2 years literally cleaning up the macro environment and trying to restore some stability to the economic foundation or the fundamentals. We have also, within these first 2 years, commenced some of our flagship programs. Not all, but some of them, and are making steady progress on them. In this third budget, when we are literally on our own, we now have more discretion to fully fund our flagship programs, ensure full execution so that it delivers the growth and the jobs and the incomes that we are looking for. I think Ghanaians are very right in therefore having high expectations and even drawing the attention of government. I hear my friends from Labour say, these are their priorities. I hear our friends, who are small-scale business people, those in industry, those in agri, all mention their expectations. I think that all of those expectations are welcome, and with what I've seen, I'm expecting that tomorrow the finance minister will deliver a budget that responds to many of these aspirations of the average Ghanaian. When it comes to the minority, I really don't want us to spend time, as it were, debating their predictions on the budget, because the last 2 predictions on the budget that they have done, there's been way off target, and it brings to question their own credibility when it comes to these economic analysis and economic predictions. I really don't see what the rush is. The minister will read the budget tomorrow. We have to take our time, listen to him, and see how it dovetails into our anticipated needs, and B, most importantly, how we are going to execute the budget. I always make the point that a budget is a statement of intent. It's a good statement of intent, but it is important also to execute accordingly. And those are the things that I think we should spend our time and energy on.
Well, I've heard some economic experts predicting that we shouldn't expect new taxes, but rather expect that government will introduce initiatives that will close some loopholes. But of course, I've also heard, and you heard the Labour Front representative saying that they don't want new taxes introduced. We've also heard the Chamber of Commerce and all the people who don't want new taxes introduced. Maybe some hope from you will settle the dust. What should we expect tomorrow in the budget with regards to taxes?
I even don't think there's any dust that requires settling. I think that these various groups have expressed what they don't want to see. I mean, consistent with our philosophy as a party, we have always spoken also about the need to rather free up the economic space and move from taxation to productivity. And we've done that right from our very first budget. In the review of our second budget, we introduced some revenue measures that were aimed at streamlining some of the tax handles to get to the original intent of the act, and also to ensure that those who who have been blessed with more will contribute a little bit more so that we can take care of those at the bottom. That was done, I think, in the second half of our second budget. That's the 2018 budget. While we were doing that as well, the principal effort has been on broadening the tax base. And so you realize we introduced a very broad, thin program, and hopefully the minister will give us numbers tomorrow about how many people we've been able to rope into the tax basket as a result of that, so that more people are contributing their little and we're making progress. You have also, I'm sure, seen, and I've actually seen reports on the JoyNews channel of the Ghana Revenue Authority being very stern on tax compliance. There are thousands of people, a nation of about 30 million people with a huge chunk who are employed formally. It cannot be the only 1.2 to 1.4 million people are those who pay tax. Formal direct income tax. There are several people who are not paying their direct income tax. There are several people who are evading when it comes to VAT, and you've seen the Ghana Revenue Authority be very stern on these people so that everybody contributes their quota. So we're clear in our mind that the tax net needs to be broadened. You will see efforts on compliance and broadening the net as well to ensure that we're able to bring in a lot more people. You also see efforts on value for money, so that it's not just about raising more money, but it's also about spending every single cedi, very efficiently, getting the good value for every single cedi that we spend. And therefore, I am not sure that the aspirations of the righteous will be extinguished. I am hopeful that the kind of expectations that the average well-meaning Ghanaian is expressing as his nation is at the crossroads and is about to put out the budget will be met.
I am hopeful too, but more importantly, Mr. Oponkroma, is the fact that government has a huge expenditure pattern, especially in the 2019 budget. And I'm happy that you mentioned that you will be delivering on your flagship programs. Again, you will come heavy on infrastructure. How does government intend to carry this burden in terms of funding? Because a lot of people are worried.
You've got to be efficient with your revenue mobilization efforts. The laws of taxation tell us that if you're efficient in your revenue mobilization effort, everybody will get to pay their due without any single person being overburdened. That's on one side. The other side is that you've also got to ensure that you spend efficiently. That's why I talk about value for money. And then in between, when it comes to your financing, you make sure that your financing is not reckless financing. It's not financing. So, for example, if you said you are going to ensure that your deficit for the year, the financing in between your revenue and expenditure doesn't exceed 4.8%, you must make sure that you stick with that financing target. That's when you show that you are not being reckless in your borrowing. You've got to ensure, therefore, that also the rates at which you are borrowing, apart from the fact that the nominal amount stay within scope, the rates at which you are financing that, they're not going for some throat-cutting, debt instruments that kind of put future burdens on your fiscal numbers. These are strategies that we have employed as an administration since we started. I am hopeful that we will continue and stay along these same strategies without necessarily having to break the bank or overburden the same Ghanaian with some more taxes. But a combination of these efforts should deliver value.
But again, the president told us in 2018 that he was going to cut down costs and save the public purse. In recent times, we've seen a lot of public officers, spending, across borders and even exceeding their budgets. A lot of people have questioned. Recently, the maritime boss was in the news. We talked about 13 conditions that are in his 4-bedroom. We talk about a lot of money.
Budget?
Well, these are some of the things the public are questioning. That if we want to save the public,
why can't we? You have to put it in context. If you say that you have seen some expenditure that you consider as frivolous, that's a fair point to make, because then you're expressing your opinion on that kind of expenditure. But if you say that it's expenditure that goes beyond budget, you have to furnish out what the budget is, and therefore what the actual is, and substantiate that argument that it's been above budget. The point I'm making is that when it comes to the national fiscal account, we are doing well to ensure that all expenditure stays within budget. Secondly, that we get value for every single cedi that we're spending. If you look at the expenditure story of this country, we have come a very long way. We are not perfect yet, but we've come a very long way. There used to be a time when there was nothing like a public procurement law, where procurement was the order of what was believed to be corruption. And then you had a public procurement law, and people used single or sole sourcing as the window through that law. You have seen under this administration a huge cutback on sole sourcing. It's not down to zero. It's not perfect yet. But if you look at the trajectory, we have come a very long way. And I'm submitting to you this evening that as we are moving into 2019 and the years ahead, you will see efforts towards value for money, ensuring that we get the worth of every single cedi that we spend, so that we don't have to overburden the same old Ghanaian to pay a lot more, even as we try to deliver on the goods and services and
so are we going to
capital expenditure.
Are we going to see some initiatives introduced by the minister? I know he's already introduced some measures to cut down allowances. Are we going to see more of that to cut down costs?
Well, like I've told you, you're going to see value for money measures. I won't take the wind out of the minister's sail, but you yourself have alluded to things that you have already seen him doing in that space. I can tell you as a big umbrella that you're going to see him embark on some more value for money measures that ensure that we get value for every single city that we spend.
So for the ordinary Ghanaian who doesn't bother about whether the fundamentals are weak or strong, but wants a reflection in his or her pocket, what would the ordinary Ghanaian take home?
The first thing we need to do is to stop dumping down the conversation that the ordinary Ghanaian doesn't understand and doesn't care. Therefore, we want to dump down the whole public conversation. It doesn't help us. We have to help the ordinary Ghanaian appreciate that the fundamentals matter. We can't say that we're in a society where 60% of the people don't understand. So the 40% of the people who understand should now refuse understanding and join the 60 who don't understand. No, we have to educate and lift the 60% so that they now join us in understanding and therefore narrowing in on the key issues. The fundamentals do matter. If the fundamentals didn't matter, we would not find money to recruit 100,000 people in NAPCO. If the fundamentals didn't matter, we won't find 1.2 billion to pay all of those arrears to contractors. If the fundamentals didn't matter, electricity would not be on today because Doomso, as we told you, was a financial crisis, not a technical crisis. So the fundamentals matter, and we must get the ordinary person to appreciate that the fundamentals matter. In addition to the fundamentals, we have now reached a level where, especially as we exit the IMF and we have more discretionary space, we can now do more of what the everyday Ghanaian is looking for. And I'm sure that as you, our colleagues in the media, help us to, share the word and educate everybody, we'll get to that point where even as today, and I've been in journalism for many years, budget discussions were not predominant and exciting as they are today. So we've come a long way. But as we do some more education, we'll get to a point where we can narrow in on all the issues that we can agree on. And the tiny ones that we have disputes on, we can even find alternate ways of cleaning it up.
Mr. Oponkuma, my final question. We came from a total debt stock of 139 billion. Now we are
122 billion as at December 2016.
But now,
which was equivalent to 73% of GDP.
Now we've hit 154 billion.
Which is equivalent to what? 65% of GDP.
So
I always make the point when I speak to my friends in the media that if I owe 1,000 seats and Kwesichum owes 1,000 seats, it's not the same thing. You always have to compare the nominal debt stock to its impact on debt sustainability. You have to compare it to the level of productivity and debt sustainability. So and the president has been consistent. Anytime he said that our debt stock is 122 billion, he said that it is equivalent to 73% of GDP. So today, for anybody who wants to raise the debt conversation, when you mention the nominal debt stock, tell us, what is it equivalent to? So today, the evidence is that whatever single city we have borrowed, we have utilized in boosting productivity to the extent that now right now the denominator is big, and as a result, our debt sustainability has gone up. And we've dropped from 73% of GDP to about 65% of GDP. We have to do more and make our debt sustainable within this limit.
All right, many thanks to you. We're extremely grateful to you. Information Minister Kojo Oponkuma was the one you just heard. So you heard the Information Minister. He says that we shouldn't be bothered about the debt stock, which many are bothered. I mean, as an economist, and from where you sit, are you bothered?
Yeah, I do. I mean, if you look at where we were and then where we find ourselves now, I mean, he wants to know whether the debt that we've accrued has added up to the economic value that we have. Clearly, I will tell you that it might add to the value of the economy, but then as to how that value addition is reflecting on the ground, I mean, it's quite questionable. It could be that we've accrued debt, but then in the end, this economic added value might be into sectors that does not involve people or does not engage the masses. Then obviously you're not adding any value as it's supposed to be. It could be government spending that is contributing to that kind of economic growth. It could also be that, obviously so many things that, at the end of the day, it might increase the GDP, but not necessarily building up into the economic growth. But then if you take, every economy, the debt that is being accrued, you ask yourself, how does it build up into revenue generation? That is the most important thing. We normally don't focus too much on, GDP, because you need to generate revenue to service your debt. So if you relate it to GDP, then it means you are blowing up the bottom. But then if you go into revenue generation, you might realize that we're not adding any value. Okay. So I think, we should, refocus, this, because you are accruing the debt, put the money into sectors that can generate money to pay for itself. So anytime you accrue debt, you have to relate it to what? Your revenue generation, whether that debt accumulation is directly feeding into revenue generation. Then you can be sure of payment of your interest and the principal. But as we speak now, we've not related to our revenue generation, and then if you relate it to the revenue generation, it might not end up being the 65 that is supposed to be. It could even be higher, because remember, our revenue generation has been coming down all this while. So I will not, buy straight into the GDP. That has been the standard all this while in the literature, if you go to the IMF website and all those places. But trust me, the focus now is how your debt builds into revenue generation. In some senses, how your debt builds into your export. Because if it turns up that you have more of your debt being foreign, then you have to think about how you can generate more foreign, currency to pay. So the GDP in itself, might not necessarily be. But remember, within the GDP, there are several components. And so if we relate it directly to the GDP, we might not be fair to ourselves. Okay.
But Mr. Kote, in your letter addressed to government, you also enumerated some things that you want, apart from the taxes you talked about. You also want to see more employment. You don't want to see unemployment rates. But of course, there are already indications and signals pointing out to the fact that in 2019, there may be job losses. I mean, how do you want government to address this?
Well, you'll agree with me, when we take the financial sector alone, with number of banks that have collapsed and many more that are yet to come, we cannot see a job creation that can actually resolve this problem.
And government says it's created some jobs already.
Beyond that, there's already an unemployment situation that is huge standing out there. So the expectation in this budget, if really job creation is going to come, the way out as to how this job is going to be created should be made known clearly. We had expected that maybe existing factories could get the so-called support that the earlier budget said we were going to give to them to enable them to expand. It never happened. Maybe he mentioned some to us that this stimulus package had gone to company A or company B, but none of these things have happened. And the struggling of the private sector is severer now than before.
Okay, and of course, and we also know that budget has a lot of, the expenditures that government does, a lot of that goes to paying public sector workers. And here we are calling on government to cut down costs. So if we want government to cut down costs, how do we want government to do this? And we also don't want to see people losing their jobs.
Well, government itself is aware about this particular phenomenon, that you cannot just eat your cake and have it. Right. Now that they has promised that police is going to see 4,000 more recruitment, immigration 2,000, etc., etc., you are increasing the public sector wage bill.
Right.
With which revenue that you are getting to get it run along the line. And we were all told, let's all sacrifice for today and then tomorrow will be better. That had been the slogan in the last budget review that was made. Clearly, the sacrifice had been on. All Ghanaians until this particular hour have learned to adjust, and we keep adjusting to see that better times will come. So for the president to come up to say that this is going to be a budget of hope, we're expecting that he will not add more to our burden. We don't know where the other revenue generation is going to come from. We have heard the minister say, the information minister say that they are going to spend wise. And
but they still have 110 ministers.
They're also going to go beyond the existing people who are in the tax net now who are paying. He gave a figure that almost 1.4 million are those who are paying, while we have that large numbers who are working and not paying. So the question we keep asking in Labour is that, do you already know them, or you are now going to identify them? Because one of the brilliant things that was said in the last review, that they were going to go after these property rates, because if you buy land per the law, you are supposed to pay some tax on it. Have they gone after those things? Have those things raked in something? Because everywhere you pass in Accra, wherever, you see buildings coming up. Those taxes that are supposed to be paid, have they found better means to go for it? Are the people who are supposed to evaluate and let people know that this is what you are supposed to pay by reason of home taxes that are there for us to pay, whether these things are going on? So a major burden is on the minister to let us know where the income is going to be generated from, because this is a government whose promises are so huge and they are all on spending spree expenditure. So it is not going to be an exciting moment for us to just see that a budget will come and it will go the way it should go. Now everybody is eager to know what exactly you are going to fund it.
How you fund it. And of course, I think we find ourselves in a dilemma here. At one point, we want to cut costs. Another point, we are spending. And we have a lot of it. So, and that's why I'm coming to Dr. Mensah, that government has a huge expenditure pattern. And of course, if you look at our revenue mobilization, I mean, we couldn't even achieve our targets for the half year. And so it means that, I mean, the total year, we cannot achieve it. So this is a country, we cannot mobilize revenue, but we are expending. And if you look at the flagship programs that government has outlined, 1.7 billion is going for the free SHS. And of course, I said earlier that this is the year that government is going to finance all the three streams, Form 1, Form 2, and Form 3. And then it says that it is going to come hard on the one constituency, 1 million, is going to champion the one district, one factory, and all these ones. And all of these involve money. Do you think the 2019 budget can handle this expenditure?
Well, if you talk about handling, obviously it should be able to handle that, obviously.
Without hurting the public purse?
Obviously, we need to feel the pain. We're going to take that major bullet of, you know, the budget going with taxes.
Is it necessary
even to the extent of borrowing? Yes, it is. You see, the information minister mentioned something that after, this is post-IMF budget, for which purely we're going to own the budget. And it's going to be more of discretionary, you know, budget for us. We have to decide what we want to spend on, and then where we generate the revenue from. It's not going to be like those days that we had, you know, the IMF on our neck, where, I mean, you're spending into an area, you're generating revenue into an area, you are restricted here and there. This time there's going to be kind of free for all. And remember, the current administration has been doing some investment, and those investments, I've been always saying that they are soft. The political actor, which is the voter, would not vote purposely for soft investment. The politicians know. They know very well that before the voter votes for you, they need to feel, they need to touch, they need to see what you've delivered. So that is why they're hammering on infrastructure, you know, going forward, those 2019. And with infrastructure, you know how capital intensive it is. The taxpayers' money cannot do that alone. We wouldn't need, you know, the borrowing. I mean, obviously we have to go out there, and that is why you hear in the pipelines that the government wants to introduce kind of centenary bond. And these are all preparation on the grounds to tell you that we will not stop borrowing, which has been a statement from the president some few weeks ago. Again, you also have to know that some of the flagship programs that you see are mainly socially oriented, and they understand the dynamics very well, that you cannot borrow on short-term basis to finance that kind of socially oriented, you know, investment for which the returns are in the long term. So we expect that obviously it's going to be taxes. And so I'm a bit afraid.
So are we being deceived that we won't get to see new taxes? Well,
I can tell you that we might not necessarily see, you know, new taxes, but taxes could be repackaged in the budget that is coming.
We saw last year.
Exactly, for which, you know, indirectly you might not realize that it's a direct tax that is coming to you. But then, in a way, it's also a means of generating money to fund some of these social obligations.
So it means that the individual is going to feel the pinch more, because, I mean, if we're going to go the tax way, it is the individual, and the individual.
That is obviously, we should expect that, because, I mean, the individuals contribute to pay taxes. That is why if you go to the advanced world, they don't joke with the human resource capacity that they have.
Okay.
But in essence, you see, we're not so confident.
Have we gotten there yet? I mean,
we're not there yet.
I was
coming to that. You see, for an economy being taxing, we expect the economy to be operating at a certain threshold.
Yeah.
For which, if you introduce the tax, the pain will not be that much.
Exactly.
And then, moreover, if we, paying taxes and we see what the taxes are doing, I mean, Ghanaians won't complain that much.
You won't feel the pain in paying that tax.
Now, you mentioned property, tax, I mean,
yes.
that's springing up. I'm wondering how confident somebody will be on that my road at Botiano to come and collect property, tax from me when you drive about 2 miles on a rough road,
exactly.
To get to me. I mean, so I think we need to get this dynamics clear. I mean, the economy is operating below capacity, for which taxes to a certain threshold will squeeze the people. And so at the end of the day, we need to understand that threshold for which taxes will not come and, topple all the, economic activities or successes that we have.
And more importantly is the public debt. And of course, people are getting worried because this is a government that said we're going to reduce, we're not going to borrow, or we'll borrow wisely. This is, we're coming from a certain point and now we're hitting 159.5 billion. And the minority in parliament is already cautioning that if we're not careful, by the end of 2019, we will get to 170 billion. I'm not an economist, but when we come back, we'll find out whether this will not be pushing us back to the IMF. This is PM Express, and we've been discussing the 2019 budget. In some few hours, the minister will be delivering it in Parliament, and the question has been, do we have something in the 2019 budget? Do we have better times ahead? Because a lot of people are crying that there are hard times. Well, the minister doesn't want us to say we want to feel it in our pocket. He wants us to understand that the fundamentals play a role. But more importantly, before we went on that break, I was talking about the country's debt right now. We are hitting 159.4 billion. That's huge. And of course, looking at what we have ahead of us in the 2019 budget, we have a lot of, the minister says we are going to hit hard on infrastructure. We're going to be dealing with some of the flagship programs of the NPP government. And with this kind of debt, already the president was criticized some time ago, recently, that he said he was not going to borrow, but he's borrowing. And when people are complaining, he says, even America borrows. So shut up and let's borrow, So, and the most, I don't know, I'm not an economist, like I said, the minority is predicting that we may hit 170 billion in 2019. How do we deal with this?
Yeah, for now, I think we should understand very well. The minority have the history. They've been in government before. They know when it's getting to election years, there are some things you cannot control. Clearly showed that, obviously, the government is going to spend. Now, let me also use the opportunity to, drum on this, that Ghana is going to borrow, but then America also borrows. America spends only about 6.8% of their revenue to settle their debt. Okay. Ghana, we use about more than 40% to settle our debt.
And even
so
we're not even
they are
generating
different,
that much.
Economies altogether. We can compare. Yeah. And then also looking at the tenure that we borrow, maximum we've had is 15 years in terms of the number of years that we borrow funds. And the effective time to maturity of this borrowing is about 7 years, for which, the investor knows that he settled himself. If you don't pay the principal, he's okay. Okay. Right. But then if you issue 100 years bond, I can tell you that it's more or less a perpetuity. And the effective time to maturity of that bond is just 13 years. Okay. So if you can borrow 15 years, why then do you extend to 100 years for which you come and overburden generations? So I believe that the government for now cannot do away with borrowing. Okay. But then we need to be circumspect. When it comes to usage of the funds that comes to us. Borrowing in itself is not bad. I can tell you.
Yeah.
If you ask me, we should be able to borrow to a level where we generate funds and there will be no free money available for usage in excesses of other things that you should understand that if you don't have any debt obligations and you generate enough, right, you can misuse it. So for me, every penny that we generate, and possibly if we can borrow to put it in a productive sector, I mean, we should borrow to the tune of even 90% of our GDP. Who cares?
All right.
We should understand the dynamics. We compare ourselves to America. America
is uncomparable.
You can compare. So at the end of the day, we can go ahead to borrow. But then for me, we need to understand, you know, that when you borrow, you place it in productive areas so that you can pay back. Possibly it's between, you know, taxes and then, you know, what do you call it? Borrowing externally or internally. When you borrow internally and your economy is not productive, you can cripple the economy.
You can cripple the economy.
You can cripple the
Ms.
economy.
Mtokote, so you are leading the Labour Front, and of course, most of what you're asking government to do is what will benefit the ordinary Ghanaian worker. Are you satisfied with the remuneration or salary regime so far? Because a lot of people are asking for increase in salaries. If times are hard and I'm paying more for electricity, more for fuel and all that, definitely I should see some rise in my salary.
Well, what I can say is that in this country, our salaries are becoming just some constant level, whilst expenditure have gone out of control. So no matter what your salary is, you are unable to make ends meet in whichever form you look at it. Normally, when you go to table to go and negotiate, you find the employer telling you all the problems that is before it. And these days, they are willing to do full disclosure and show you their books and say, look, if I should add even 2%, it to me will not be able to survive. So sustainability concept, which has driven the trade union for far so long, is what is holding us down. So what we even get by reason of increases are not something that is satisfying, you know, the workers themselves. But everybody has the Ghanaian concept that, look, so for us to be earning this and be able to hold on to tomorrow, that would be okay for us. So that is it. And clearly, the expenditure part in government don't have control over it. When it comes to our wage bill, government have so much control as to how much they want to pay, but they are not controlling the expenditure. I mean, go to the market, even when we have our utility bills running, nobody could just hold it and say you can't go there. Even school fees that are not in the free SHS, you can control them. And therefore, the worker actually goes through a lot of hardship. In these last 2 years, it hasn't been easy for the Ghanaian worker. People were trying to give some understanding to government. Oh, we just came, we've inherited so much rot, that is not there, that is not there.
It's
but
2 years already. Should we still accept that excuse?
I'm saying the patience is over. Because the kind of leverage they were looking from us have been given. The gratuitous manner by which that ought to be done have been done.
It means that we have to hold them by their ears or wherever we need to hold them tomorrow, and we must see all of these things
these
reflecting
budgets should
in the
not
budget.
come and compound the pain that we are going through. Because you see, last time the minister was smart to swerve everybody when we were thinking that we were going to see something exceptional on the VAT, and that didn't happen. But even though that didn't happen, later on he introduced backdoor. And unless you don't buy, if you buy and it is VAT receipt, obviously you pay.
And it's inevitable. You will definitely buy.
Knowing how much promises they have on the floor, and knowing that it's about time for them also to meet those promises. Obviously, this budget, we are scared that we are going to see more burden, you know, come to us. Other than that, the president saying that Ghana beyond aid, we won't borrow, we are not expecting foreign aid also to come. IMF has finished its job. What is it that is going to fill in the gap? We have seen budgets in this country where normally foreign aid will have to come in before the budget is actually, you know, balanced. And the deficit has kept growing time after time.
So briefly, your expectations?
Well, we're looking forward that the financial sector, you know, statement and direction will be given to make it more solid, because the loss of jobs that we have seen in recent times and the fear that more are going to come, we expect this particular budget to allay those fears, because the banks are really suffering. We have seen these panic withdrawals and banks are not able to actually deal with issues the way they should. We also expect to see good stability between the cedi and the dollar. That parity must clearly be there.
And that will do a lot of good to businesses and even the
Exactly.
individual. Dr. Mensah, just a brief comment, our time.
Yeah, I'm expecting a budget that can be friendly, a budget that even if there's going to be introduction of taxes, it should be targeted, not holistic kind of budgets that the taxes that we've been experiencing in the past. Because Ghanaians are really struggling as we speak now.
Because Ghanaians are really struggling, and of course, for us, the workers, we're also looking on to a budget that is very friendly to us, so we can all relate and feel a bit comfortable in the country. And that's how we wrap up PM Express. Many thanks for watching. Thank you so much, Dr. Mensah and Mr. Solomon Kotse, for joining the discussion. And you at home, many thanks for watching. Have a great one.